Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you to our hosts. I'm extremely grateful to be here today. And thank you to Jay Greenriver, who I believe some of you know, who encouraged me to submit an abstract to talk here today. This is a slightly different sphere to the one that I normally inhabit. It's the first time I'm meeting really any of you. But so far the conversations I've had have been fantastic. Mute it. Okay, how's that? Yeah, that's much better. So if you Google my name, you'll find my Substack. That's where I do my work. I used to work in tech. As a little bit of background, I was slightly horrified to see that the organizers from the abstract I submitted had promoted on Twitter this talk as against duty porn, pornography, which in retrospect is actually not a terrible title for reasons that I hope will become clear. So, to begin, there is a seeming contradiction in the fact that we exist here today. And the second law of thermodynamics states that in a closed system, in an isolated system, entropy can only increase. And the universe is a closed system. How then is it possible that a closed system that started as an incomprehensibly dense, even distribution of particles at extreme temperatures went through billions of years of entropy, implying ever-increasing disorder and randomness, only to yield and sustain incredibly complex, stable structures like those of living beings, us, and existing in a seemingly ordered and predictable environment here? The answer to that question, I hope, will explain why I disagree with this tweet, which quotes from a section of Caribbean Rhythms, which many of you will be familiar with. I am not going to do the cracked out Siberian gypsy voice, but you can imagine it. Quote, "If you're in a secret society, or whatever small group of men, not a secret society, a group of men who devote themselves to, let's say, a great scientific task or such, or you're in the order of Teutonic Knights or Templar Knights or other such, and one of you, he pines to go home to his wife, and that's his priority. And he does your thing during the daytime hours for work or for money or entertainment, but his real priority is his wife at home. That man is a traitor. And if that sounds extreme to you, this is why nothing gets done today, by the way." I will show why the answer to that question, why our environment is seemingly ordered in the face of entropy, is actually why I disagree with the sentiment expressed in this tweet. Central to the question of why we are here is the manipulation of energy. We live in a strange but wonderful state of homeostasis, the self-regulating process by which biological systems maintain stability in the face of disorder. If homeostasis is successful, life continues. If unsuccessful, disaster and death ensue. We are only able to exist in homeostasis because our local environment, this planet, is a relatively low entropy one. We exist within a temporary zone of low entropy in an increasingly disordered universe. The second law of thermodynamics says that the total entropy in the universe has to increase, but it still allows for local decreases in entropy as long as those decreases are balanced out by an increase in entropy somewhere else. This is, of course, the extropy that Oron comprehensively examined last night. So how is our particular anomalous zone of low entropy maintained? A common misconception is that life can only be sustained because the sun radiates energy at us, which we capture and absorb. But this answer is in fact incomplete and insufficient because the Earth actually radiates out almost exactly the same amount of energy that it takes in from the sun. In fact, if we received much more energy from the sun, everything would die due to the terrible heat. So the answer is not merely that we receive quote-unquote energy, it is that we receive energy in a particularly structured, concentrated, and useful form. For every photon of visible light, which is useful, that we receive from the sun, we radiate out 20 photons of infrared light, each with 1/20th of the energy of the original photon. In other words, we take in order and we project disorder. Our low entropy existence depends on our ability to absorb, utilize, and disperse structured energy. We don't just require energy to live and grow and maintain order. We require particularly calibrated energy in an ordered and useful form. Okay, so what does this have to do with vitalism and the Bappian project? My contention is that the vitalists are experts at increasing huge amounts of high entropy energy, affecting in some way hundreds of thousands of people, creating churn and noise and heat, but are less expert in generating low entropy energy necessary for the construction and sustenance of strong and ordered systems. This tweet below, is an example of high entropy energy. It sounds incredibly exciting to suggest that men should be ready to leave their families in the service of the mission. It might be easier if they never had families at all. But this call comes at the wrong time in history. And the mission that men should turn away from their families for is always undefined or clearly fantasy. The section of the BAP speech that the tweet is drawn from is more nuanced than many of its critics gave it credit for, and I'm not denying the presence of truth there. But in the context in which it is delivered, in practice, it quickly devolves into a nihilistic antinatalism and the death of a movement, no matter how much energy it generates in the short term. It is emblematic of a high entropy philosophy and endeavor. Today, I thought I would offer a structured examination of why this is the case. Thus, in some sense, this is a negative talk, focusing on failure, on how and why a grand project like theirs is succumbing to entropy. I hope, however, that this won't be taken as an attack from a place of spite. I hope that some of these insights might be useful, in fact, in furthering similar projects. I wouldn't consider myself a true vitalist or a Catholic with vitalist tendencies, but I do have a certain sympathy for aspects of that project. And they can definitely be entertaining. I'm sure many of you have read that book. I own several copies myself. The structural factors which I will examine are leadership, ritual, space, and self-sacrifice. So to begin with leadership. We are told of the foolish man who built his house on sand. You'll be familiar with the passage from the book of Matthew. Quote, "And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and they beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall thereof." End quote. This error is being repeated on the vitalist right. This is a movement that is built on the sands of the internet, upon which the violent winds of discourse rage, but there is no rock to be found. It is a disembodied space, unlike us here today. A space of pure voice, lacking physicality, akin to those deserts in which only the demons dwell, whose whispers are carried upon the howling winds and the blowing sands. A place in which nothing can be built has neither future nor past. It is a liminal space, meant only to be passed through, a space that serves as the connective tissue between one state and the next, for which has no meaningful independent existence. As my friend Theophilus Chilton, who perhaps some of you are familiar with, describes, quote, "We should understand that liminal spaces themselves are not order or structure, neither do they create form from chaos. The liminal spaces are, in essence, places which exist outside these regions of order, between and transitional to them." End quote. We cannot make a home in the liminal, yet this is where they seem to be trapped, lost in transition, never able to emerge as a movement into a physical state in which we can build lasting structures. A furious forward momentum is felt that never actually carries them a single step forward. Worse, time in this limbo causes harm. A land with no bodies, only voice, lends itself to the worst kind of discourse between men, that which lacks the threat of physical violence. The fact that the most heinous things can be said about each other without ever coming to blows makes women of us all, no disrespect to the 3 women in the audience. In this artificial social fabric, resolution can never be achieved, only endless gossip and backbiting. Their project, so masculine in nature, will never succeed in a space with the social dynamics of a girls' school. There can be no kings, warriors, or heroes in the void. But there is one who thrives in this environment, the jester, the trickster. The disembodied land presents the ultimate jester's privilege, which is a term that refers to the luxury of the jester to provoke without fear of violent retribution. The environment creates selective pressures that elevates the jester to a place far above his proper stature. He has endless targets to mock, though many of them certainly deserve the derision, an audience to clap for him, and no one to check his excesses. In the king's absence, the jester takes the vacant throne. All eyes are on him all the time. But his nature, his instincts, and his abilities, so valuable in their proper setting, which I will get into, are disastrous in the role of leadership. But the jester is a necessary character, challenging the status quo, exerting a changing power over the powerful through the use of humor and insight and transgression. A purer vision of this archetype is provided by the Greek conception of Hermes, pictured here, messenger of the Olympians and divine trickster. Hermes was understood as the master of transitions and the traversing of boundaries, quote, not only physical thresholds, but more importantly, thresholds between states of human experience, between day and night, sleep and wakefulness, between consciousness and that of which we are unconscious, between life and death. End quote. Like the element Mercury, he was the great dissolving agent, making hidden things visible. He is the agent of transformation, changing others while remaining unchanged himself. Quote, by passing through the hidden boundaries which we create, and yet of which we remain unaware, we enter myth, the imaginative awareness of life, that answers questions about who we are, where we have come from, and where we are going. End quote. He was amoral, the in-between, the elusive connecting principle. He lightened the entrenched relationships between things before slipping away like quicksilver. The erosion of the established structures and dogmas acted as the catalyst for revolution, evolution, and change. His appearance initiated dreams and the possibilities of progress. Hopefully the parallels here to a work like Bronze Age Mindset, which perhaps some of you have read, are clear. But in a land, the internet, in which nothing can be built, there is no physical reality to recrystallize his passengers into. There is no definite vision for what people should become or do. Frantic visions of possibilities, dreams, and unrealities are presented before disappearing without a trace, like a never-ending tunnel of terror. I trust there are no pirates or raiders or warrior kings in this audience today, which is not a condemnation of you. I don't think there are many in the 100,000 followers of BAP either. In a space of pure voice, silence is death, and so the jester fears tranquility. He stirs up nervous energy relentlessly. His is a necessarily social role, and he cannot be alone. He always needs someone to mock and an audience to perform for, a structure to undermine and boundaries to traverse. When the jester becomes king, all is chaos, and progress is impossible. And so we have a failure of leadership. Next, I would like to talk about action. You'll recognize Yukio Mishima. When actions do not match rhetoric, it undermines rather than reinforces belief. If the vitalist right is to avoid the heat death of its own belief system, it must act like it believes. Without immanentizing their philosophy, the vitalists will remain caught in the web of postmodernity. The longer that their words remain untethered to their actions, the greater the danger grows. One of the central markers of the postmodern mind is epistemic uncertainty, and by failing to act as one speaks, one reaffirms this lack of conviction. If you espouse a value system that you don't deeply embed into your own life, but instead treat as entertainment to be consumed in the evenings, you are reaffirming a postmodern culture, not transcending it. Paradoxically, the faiths that have the greatest longevity are those that make the strictest imposition on their followers. I'm told there are many traditional Catholics in the audience here today. Many of you will have been attracted, indeed like myself, to that faith structure precisely because of the rigorous demands it places on the order of the service of yourself, on the music, on the aesthetics of the movement, and so forth. It is a more rigorous and tight belief system. Strenuous action must be demanded, and demanded immediately. As the prayers of the faithful do not cease when they leave church, so the duty of the vitalist to manipulate reality does not cease when he puts down his weights. Part of the issue is what I believe is an incomplete reading of one of the central texts of the movement, Yukio Mishima's Sun and Steel, which I hope some of you have read. It really is wonderful. Mishima was racked in his youth by bodily weakness and an intellectual precociousness that led him to despairing that he never encountered the world as is. He was never given the chance, consumed by a preoccupation with words, theory, and narrative, a theory cell. His mind's constructed a veil around him that prevented the raw interface with reality that he longed for. Mishima determined to break out of the prison of his mind through a radical project that focused totally on his physicality. He endeavored to incarnate his spirit through a furious engagement with sun and steel, breaking and reforming his body on an altar of weights in the blazing light of day. Quote, "To revive the dead language, the discipline of the steel was required. To change the silence of death into the eloquence of life, the aid of steel was essential. The steel faithfully taught me the correspondence between spirit and body." End quote. A full understanding of Mishima's project is not one of bodybuilding. It was an audacious attempt at the total synthesis of spirit and physique. Weights are just one of a number of rituals, sun, steel, combat, by which Mishima was preparing himself for the total transcendence of the divide in his being through the final act of death. I regard Mishima's suicide as a fundamentally horrific, tragic, and terrible sin, but it must also be recognized as a supreme act of will. If the lesson that the right takes from Mishima is that bodybuilding is sufficient to overcome the divide between discourse and reality, then it will fail. Mishima was able to maintain and strengthen his philosophical conviction to the very end, to refine his belief to a point of shining brilliance through the total integration of physical ritual and action into his intellectual system. He was not just lifting weights. In pursuing these two lives, like myself, the vitalist and the Christian, one is aware of a stark contrast. Unlike the church, the vitalist rite has no rituals, it has no ceremonies, it has no body, it has no liturgy. Liturgy is the structure of the ritual of worship. From the Greek laos, the people, and the root ergon, work, it is thus usually defined in the Christian tradition as the work of the people. It defines the proper and shared form of action. In the Catholic Church, we follow the Roman Missal, which defines how the liturgy is to be celebrated. It binds the celebrant not just to the words that are said, written in black, but also to the actions which are taken, written in red. It is through the liturgy that the sacraments are administered and the faith is maintained. Quote, I think this is from the Catechism, "The purpose of the sacraments is to sanctify men, to build up the body of Christ, and finally to give worship to God. Because they are signs, they also instruct. They not only presuppose faith, but by words and objects, they also nourish, strengthen, and express it. That is why they are called sacraments of faith." End quote. Or in the words of St. James, "Thou believest that there is one God. Thou dost well. The devils also believe and tremble. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead?" End quote. The rite will not live until it finds its rituals, its gatherings, its rites, its liturgy. Without this, young men will discover it, be seduced by it, tire of it, and discard it. How many here, I was not here last time, but I imagine there were many faces last time that were extremely motivated that are somehow not present today. Bodybuilding cannot be the only mode of prescribed action. Weights alone will not bind them for life. So that's action. Now we'll discuss place. The movement certainly has the kindling and the spark, the raw energy. So where is the fire? They have exceptional people. They are genuinely extremely smart, many of the top people in that movement, the most respected, and a fervent desire to build a new order from chaos. So where is the action? I believe that they have failed to internalize how a crusade begins, despite all the calls for piratical adventures. Such a crusade cannot coalesce spontaneously out of a distributed cast of willing actors. It must have a single inception point, a moment when the spark touches the kindling and the flames burst into existence. If this fire is to arise, it will arise in a sacred space, a fixed geographic point that will be the center of the new spiritual universe, of a new world conception. They must understand the magnitude of the task. They do not merely desire a new political configuration. They desire a total resacralization of the cosmos, a bursting through of the sacred, the eternal, the transcendent, the unstoppable spring that will wash away our trash world. If you want to convert people away from an order that promises material comfort, you must offer them richer sustenance, the spiritual. In the words of the great historian of religion of the 20th century, Mircea Eliade, we must move away from the sacred, from the profane to the sacred. Quote, this is from The Sacred and the Profane, which is one of his books. The sacred and the profane are two modes of being in the world, two existential situations assumed by man in the course of his history. End quote. The sacred, with all its terrifying power, is distinguished from its opposite, the profane, the worldly, the barren chaos of the desacralized, that in which we currently live. How do we step from one mode of being to the other? They must discover a fixed point for the sacred to break through, and their world to be founded, a sacred space. Quote, revelation of a sacred space makes it possible to attain a fixed point and hence to acquire orientation in the chaos of homogeneity, to found the world, and to live in a real sense. The profane experience, on the contrary, maintains the homogeneity and hence the relativity of space. For it is the break effected in space that allows the world to be constituted, because it reveals the fixed point, the central axis for all future orientation. When the sacred manifests itself, there is not only a break in the homogeneity of space, there is also the revelation of an absolute reality, opposed to that non-reality of the vast surrounding expanse. End quote. The task of the Nietzschean atheists, quite different from ours as Christians, comes with its own challenges. They must coalesce in space, in contrast to their current online form. They must discern the central geographic point on which to found their new order. Traditionally, this happens according to divine omens. What will theirs be? They must consecrate this point. How would they do this? To let their divine ontology, what is that, manifest and break through into this plane. What will their Jacobean moment be? To quote from the book of Genesis, when Jacob in his dream at Haran saw a ladder reaching to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it, and heard the Lord speaking from above it, saying, I am the Lord God of Abraham. He awoke and was afraid and cried out, how dreadful is this place, and none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And he took the stone that had been his pillow and set it up as his monument and poured oil on the top of it. He called the place Bethel, that is, the house of God. End quote. This is, of course, the spark described by Dr. Parvini yesterday, a true believer, not an intellectual. It is hard to imagine an act of consecration that they would have total true belief in. Theirs is an intellectual movement, a modern movement, self-consciously trying to intellectualize the sacred into existence. I have my doubts that this is possible. The children of winter cannot embody the spring. Without this authentic act of total, unself-conscious faith in the consecration of their home, will they really summon the resolve to take the radical acts that they often describe but never take? Will they ever find the religion they seek? To finally quote from Mircea, religious man can only live in a sacred world, because it is only in such a world that he participates in being and has a real existence. This religious need expresses an unquenchable ontological thirst. Religious man thirsts for being. His terror of the chaos that surrounds his inhabited world corresponds to his terror of nothingness. The unknown space that extends beyond his world, an uncosmicized because unconsecrated space, a mere amorphous extent in which no orientation has been projected, and hence in which no structure has yet arisen for religious man. This profane space represents absolute non-being. If, by some evil chance, he strays into it, he feels empty of his ontic substance, as if he were dissolving in chaos, and he finally dies. Let us each strive to seek total assumption into the sacred mode, and we will see who succeeds. To conclude this talk, I will talk about sacrifice. Duty porn. Man will not make terrible sacrifices for a movement if he does not observe leadership doing the same. He will not run into the fray for a general that is holding back. Without the rise of a culture of self-sacrifice and service to one's brothers, the underpinnings of a true, united, real-world tribe, the vitalist right, will not manifest any of its dreams of action. One cannot believe that a movement is worth sacrificing everything for, the riches, family, friends offered by the mainstream, if even the movement's chief exponent lives lives of conventional comfort and luxury. I am reminded of a strange, oblique book by Hermann Hesse called The Journey to the East. It is a difficult, mystical story, centering around an ancient initiatory order, in which the unnamed protagonist is called to embark on a pilgrimage with his fellow initiates that doesn't just traverse geographies, but slips through time, reality, and myth. Each member of the pilgrimage has a particular desire they wish to satisfy. For our protagonist, it is to gaze upon the face of the beautiful Princess Fatima. Quote, "We not only wandered through space, but also through time. We moved towards the east, but we also traveled into the Middle Ages and the Golden Age. Throughout the centuries, it had been on the way towards light and wonder, and each member, each group, indeed our whole host, and its great pilgrimage, was only a wave in the eternal stream of human beings, of the eternal strivings of the human spirit towards the east, towards home." End quote. All of the pilgrims rely in this story, consciously or subconsciously, on Leo, a faithful servant of the expedition, who remains ever cheerful and loyal, performing duties from the most mundane to carrying the order's most sacred items. One day, the servant Leo disappears without a trace or explanation. Gradually, the disharmony of the initiate pilgrim starts to show. Fractures, arguments, uncertainty, doubt, and a lack of hope. Without the inconspicuous but ever-present support and binding energy of Leo, the servant of all, one by one the initiates lose their faith and fall out of the mystical pilgrimage back into the world of mundanity. After many years, our protagonist, who has fallen deep into despair and the contemplation of suicide, again encounters Leo, who he begs to bring him back into the spiritual existence of the order. Leo subjects him to various tests of faith and exercises in self-reflection, but ultimately returns him to the order to stand trial for his apostasy. In the final moments of the story, it is revealed that the final judgment will be delivered by Leo himself, who is shown to have been the leader of the order from the beginning. So what are we to make of this? It is a work that reflects on the futility of engaging with the transcendent in an extractive, demanding, and self-serving fashion, rather than a mode of service. It is interesting that the protagonist is a writer who dreams of writing the definitive history of the order. At the end of the story, he is admitted to the order's archives. Naively, he is overjoyed until he starts exploring and realizes the books therein are so numerous and written in so many languages that summarization is impossible. No doubt this is Hesse commenting on the futility of his own calling, born of the tension between the mystical nature of Hesse's wide-ranging spiritual quest and his profession as a writer, which demanded that he codify and record his beliefs and experiences using the blunt medium of language. Quote, "I agree with Siddhartha, our wise friend from the East, who once said, words do not express thoughts very well. Immediately, everything becomes a little different, a little distorted, a little foolish." End quote. Words alone cannot convey the true majesty of the transcendent. There are limitations to what the writer can achieve. But the true insight that resides at the heart of the story is that service is an aspect of leadership, and leadership is an aspect of service. True faith begets sacrifice. Without this, can we call it faith at all? The greatest advantage that the right, broadly construed, has is not that it has something to give people. It is that it has something to demand of them. People thrive when something is being demanded of them. The most enduring faiths are those that make the strictest demands upon their adherents. Only by tapping into this profound source of energy can we turn the tide of entropy. We must beware of duty porn, which mimics, feeds off, and ultimately wastes this energy through a lack of authenticity. Here I am referring to the original tweet. This takes us back to our tweet, suggesting that men shouldn't start families lest they are less able to give themselves totally to the mission. End quotes. Those advancing this viewpoint fail to define the mission and left unspecified what men should be doing instead. But it sounded exciting and made people that weren't doing anything feel like radicals. We must make genuine and profound demands of people, but they will not adhere to these demands unless they perceive them as absolutely authentic. And young men will not perceive these demands as authentic if they are not situated in a matrix of leadership, action, place, and sacrifice. Again from the book of Matthew, "But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for the many." End quote. People will only act with the energy required to turn the tide of entropy if they observe us making radical sacrifices ourselves. These will neither be LARPing fantasies nor grand acts of self-immolation. They will be profound, striking, and beautiful acts of service. Allow me to conclude with a brief observation from my own life. I returned to the faith I was born into, Catholicism, when I was in my mid-20s. As my belief deepened, I felt compelled to honor the sacrifices that the faith requires. I asked my now wife that we should live chastely until marriage. Once we started honoring that sacrifice, it quickly became clear that we should marry in short order. And once we were married, children soon followed. And so, alone amongst our friends, we were married with children in our mid-20s, which neither of us had expected or were truly prepared for, financially or emotionally. We had made a sacrifice, and it had made us vulnerable. But a curious thing happened. In our vulnerability, observing our sacrifice, others came to our aid in a way that we never expected. My mother, who very much believes in the feminism of her generation, had continually sought to dissuade us from marrying and having children so young. But when we gave her grandchildren, she became a grandmother, and clearly this affected her. We moved closer to each other, and she slowly left her career, which she had planned to continue deep into her retirement years, a true boomer, fade, giving more and more of her time to her children and grandchildren. Our family tightened. And in the cascade of service that arose on this journey, my confirmation of services that arose on this journey, my confirmation, my wife's conversion and entry into the faith, our marriage and the baptism of each of our children, our family and friends were again and again asked to call to join us in church and to celebrate. And this had a lasting effect on some. My father recently asked me to attend a regular Sunday service with us after decades away from the faith. And so our community tightened too. I have to say that I strongly reject that men with families will be less able to make sacrifices for the cause. In fact, I believe that in some sense they are the most able, and most able to turn the tide of entropy that besets us as a result. Men with children are no less capable of bold feats. All three of the men who first landed on the moon had 3 children, nor are they less capable of terrible sacrifice and service. I will end by reading 2 paragraphs from the Sullivan Ballou letter made famous by the Ken Burns documentary on the American Civil War. Sullivan Ballou died at the Battle of Bull Run a week after writing these words. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break. Yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me unresistibly on with all these chains to the battlefield. The memories of the blissful moments I have spent with you come creeping over me, and I feel most gratified to God and to you that I have enjoyed them for so long. And hard it is for me to give them up and to burn the ashes, the hopes of future years, when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and seen our sons grow up to honourable manhood around us. I have, I know, but few and small claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me, perhaps it is the wafted prayer of my little Edgar, that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. And if I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, and when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Thank you.